What if one of the most famous comedy characters in the world wasn't just strange, but something far more mysterious? For over 3 decades, audiences across the globe laughed at the silent chaos of Mr. Bean, the awkward man in the brown suit who always seemed completely lost in everyday situations. But the story behind that character is far more complicated than most people realize. Behind the expressions and perfectly timed physical comedy was Rowan Atkinson, a man dealing with personal struggles, career frustrations, and a secret about Mr. Bean that quietly sparked one of the internet's strangest theories. And after years of speculation, the truth finally came out, and it surprised almost everyone. For more than 30 years, the world laughed at Mr. Bean. The man in the tight brown suit, the crooked red tie, and the tiny green car became one of the most recognizable comedy characters on the planet. He barely spoke, yet people from Tokyo to Buenos Aires understood him instantly. Children adored him, adults quoted his scenes, and entire families gathered around television screens just to watch the next absurd situation he would stumble into. But behind the silence and perfectly timed chaos stood Rowan Atkinson, a man whose real life was far more complicated than the character he played. While audiences saw effortless comedy, Atkinson was navigating private struggles, personal insecurities, and a career that sometimes felt trapped by the very success that made him famous. To understand how Mr. Bean came to exist, you have to go back long before the character ever appeared on television. Rowan Sebastian Atkinson was born on January 6, 1955, in the quiet town of Consett in County Durham, England. His family had no connection to acting or entertainment. His father, Eric Atkinson, ran a farm and a successful agricultural business, while his mother, Ella, managed the household and raised their 4 sons. Nothing about Rowan's childhood suggested he would grow into an international comedy icon. In fact, one of his biggest challenges growing up was something that could easily have prevented him from ever stepping onto a stage. From an early age, Atkinson struggled with a severe stutter. Speaking in public was incredibly difficult for him. Simple sentences could become frustrating obstacles, and conversations sometimes turned into moments of uncomfortable silence while people waited for him to finish his words. In an era when speech impediments were poorly understood and often mocked, it could have easily crushed his confidence. Instead, it pushed him in a completely unexpected direction. Because words didn't always cooperate, Atkinson began discovering something else. He could make people laugh without speaking at all. A facial expression, a strange movement, a sudden reaction. Those things communicated instantly. Even as a young man, he realized that comedy didn't always need dialogue. Sometimes the funniest moments were completely silent. Academically, Atkinson was far from the stereotype of a comedian. He was intelligent, analytical, and deeply interested in science. After finishing school, he attended Newcastle University, where he studied electrical and electronic engineering. He graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree before continuing his education at Oxford University, where he pursued a master's degree in electrical engineering at the Queen's College. Oxford would quietly change the direction of his life. While studying there, Atkinson joined the Oxford University Dramatic Society and the Experimental Theatre Club. At first, it was simply a way to socialize and try something new outside of engineering lectures. But very quickly, he began discovering that performing on stage felt natural. More importantly, he met 2 people who would become crucial to his future. The first was Richard Curtis, a talented writer with a sharp sense of humor who would later create some of Britain's most beloved comedies. The second was Howard Goodall, a composer who understood rhythm, timing, and how music could elevate comedic performance. Together, they began experimenting with sketches that leaned heavily on physical humor and unusual characters. These performances slowly shaped Atkinson's comedic identity. His characters were often socially awkward, confused by normal human behavior, and constantly struggling to navigate simple situations. The audience response was immediate. People found these characters hilarious, but very few realized how personal they actually were. Atkinson understood awkwardness and social discomfort on a deeply personal level. The characters he created reflected that experience. By the late 1970s, his career began to gain real momentum. One of his first major breaks came with a BBC radio comedy that quickly led to television work. In 1979, he joined a satirical sketch show called Not the 9 O'Clock News. The show became an enormous success and launched the careers of several British comedians. Atkinson stood out immediately. His performances mixed intelligence with absurd physical comedy, making him different from many other performers on the show. Soon after, he starred in another iconic British series, Blackadder, a historical comedy that relied heavily on clever dialogue, sarcasm, and complex characters. The show proved something important. Atkinson wasn't just a physical comedian. He was a skilled actor capable of sharp, intelligent humor. But while those shows made him famous in Britain, something else was quietly taking shape behind the scenes. Atkinson and Richard Curtis began discussing an idea for a completely different type of character, one who barely spoke at all. Inspired by silent film legends like Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, they imagined a character who communicated entirely through expressions, body language, and visual chaos. In early drafts, the character didn't even have a name. He was simply described as a man, dealing with everyday situations in the most ridiculous way possible. Eventually, someone suggested a strange, meaningless name, Mr. Bean. The name sounded funny, simple, and slightly absurd, which made it perfect. When the show finally premiered on January 1st, 1990, almost no one expected what would happen next. The character wore a narrow brown suit, drove a tiny green Mini Cooper, and communicated mostly through grunts, confused expressions, and a single muttered word, Bean. The show had almost no dialogue. It didn't need any. Within a short time, Mr. Bean exploded into a global phenomenon. The series spread across more than 190 countries, transcending language barriers in a way very few television characters ever had. Yet as the character grew bigger and more famous, something strange began happening to the man behind him. As Mr. Bean became a global sensation, the character slowly began to overshadow the man who created him. Wherever Rowan Atkinson went, people didn't see an actor. They saw Mr. Bean. At airports, in restaurants, on the streets, strangers called him by the character's name. For many fans around the world, the distinction between the performer and the character simply didn't exist. At first, Atkinson understood why it was happening. Mr. Bean was designed to be universal. Because the character barely spoke, anyone from any culture could understand the humor instantly. But over time, that success created an unexpected problem. The more famous Mr. Bean became, the harder it was for audiences to see Atkinson as anything else. Outside the UK, many people didn't even know about his other brilliant work. Shows like Blackadder and Not the 9 O'Clock News had proven his incredible range as a comedian and actor, but those productions relied heavily on British history, language, and satire. They didn't travel internationally the way Mr. Bean did, so globally, Atkinson became trapped inside his own creation. There was another truth that surprised many fans when he eventually admitted it. Playing Mr. Bean wasn't always fun. The character required extreme precision. Every movement, every facial expression, every pause had to be perfectly timed. Because there was almost no dialogue, the entire performance depended on physical comedy. If a gesture failed, the scene failed. Filming a single sequence could take hours of repeating the same movements again and again until they were flawless. It was physically exhausting and mentally draining. What looked effortless on screen actually demanded intense concentration from the actor behind the character. As the years passed and Atkinson grew older, the physical demands of Mr. Bean became harder to maintain. The role that once brought worldwide fame also carried a heavy burden of expectation from millions of fans who wanted the same magic every time they saw him. Yet despite the pressure, the character remained beloved across generations. Decades after the first episode aired, new audiences were still discovering the silent man in the brown suit and laughing just as hard as viewers did in 1990. But the biggest surprise about Mr. Bean wasn't the fame, the pressure, or even the man behind the character. It was the strange theory that had followed the show for years. The idea that Mr. Bean might not actually be human at all. And when that theory was finally addressed, the truth turned out to be far stranger than most people expected. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves classic comedy, and subscribe for more fascinating stories behind famous characters. And now I'm curious, do you think Mr. Bean was really meant to be an alien, or was it just a clever comedy idea? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.